Welcome to this first Foresight Dialogue. We wait a few seconds in order to allow everyone to join. I think we can start. Hello, everyone, again. Thank you for joining us at this third Foresight Dialogue on climate change and communication. I am Alessandra Mazzai. I am part of the communication office at the CMCC, the Euro-Mediterranean Center on Climate Change. I'm very happy to be here today to introduce today's webinar on climate change and disinformation, state of the art and how to tackle it. To introduce you to today's speakers, Paula Gori, who is Secretary General of the European Digital Media Observatory, and Tommaso Canetta, Deputy Director of Pagella Politica and Coordinator for Fact-Checking at the European Digital Media Observatory. This webinar, as I said, is organized by the CMCC, the Euro-Mediterranean Center on Climate Change, in collaboration with the Agora project, a project which is coordinated by the CMCC. The CMCC is the Italian Research Center on Climate Change. Our aim is to simulate sustainable growth and to study the climate system and its interactions with the environment, the society, the policy making. But besides developing scientific research, CMCC is also committed to reach out to various audiences with the climate knowledge and enhance the public's comprehension and awareness related to climate change. With this aim, we carry on several communication activities for the public at large, and this series of dialogue, the Foresight Dialogues, are one of our works in this direction, in which we are hosting writers, artists, journalists, scientists, innovators to discuss the role of communication in accelerating the climate transition. The Foresight Dialogues borrow their name from our magazine, Climate Foresight, a magazine that looks into the future and provides in-depth contents through interviews, articles, multimedia, and a podcast deep into the future planet. It's a podcast inspired by the insights of scientists, artists, and activists, all bringing together different voices to look into the future. And an article on climate change disinformation focused on today's webinar will be published soon, in which you will find also the video recording of this webinar. The series of webinar Foresight Dialogues is organized in the context of the Climate Change Communication Award Rebecca Ballestra. This is an initiative of the CMCC through which we are building a continuously growing global platform that collects and rewards the best communication projects worldwide and connects their authors in a network that fosters collaboration. The call for proposals for the award is open until June 15, and we invite all authors of communication projects on climate change to apply by then. As anticipated, this webinar is organized in the context also of the Agora project coordinated by the CMCC. It's an Horizon project started in January 2023 to co-design and co-create adaptation to climate change to support the objectives of the mission adaptation on climate change. Agora will leverage and step forward best practices, innovative approaches, policy instruments, and governance mechanisms to engage communities and regions in climate action. During the project, a set of digital tools targeted to multiple audiences will be made available on the Digital Agora, which will represent a co-designed learning space and resource hub. Since tackling climate change disinformation is one of Agora's cornerstone, Agora will also focus on providing trustworthy information and resources on climate change, as well as fact-checking information from credible sources. Just a few technical tips. During the webinar, you will have the opportunity to pose some questions to the speakers. You can write them directly in the Q&A panel in your Zoom platform, and I will pose them to the speaker at the end of the webinar. I invite you to join CMCC and to follow us on our social media channels. And before leaving the floor to our speaker today, I would like to invite you to follow also the forthcoming Foresight Dialogue, which will be held on May 25. The topic will be Art and Science Towards Climate Action. We will have 3 guest speakers: Carolina Aragon, who is an artist and professor on the relationship between science and art; Vladimir Judrevich, climatologist; and Mariana Brick, acting director at the Center for the Promotion of Science. It's finally time to leave the floor to our speaker today. I introduce you Tommaso Canetta. As I said, he is Deputy Director of Pagella Politica and Facta News, the 2 main Italian fact-checking outlets, and he is coordinator for the fact-checking activities of EDMO, the European Digital Media Observatory. Paula Gori is Secretary General and coordinator of EDMO. She joined the School of Transnational Governance at the European University Institute in 2017, where she is a member of the management team. Prior, she was coordinator of the Florence School of Regulation, Communication and Media. So I leave the floor to our speakers.
Thank you,
Tommaso
Alessandra.
Is starting, right?
Yeah. I'm the lucky one. Usually it's ladies first, but for this time you will have to bear with me first. So thank you for having me here. I will present some slides now that will help me in talking about disinformation related to climate change.
Thank you, Tommaso. I just add that we have almost 500 registered people today, so the topic is quite appreciated by our audience.
I'm happy to hear it. It's very important. It's very relevant. And actually, yeah, we understood this was a very important topic of disinformation, not because we decided, let's say, ex ante, that it was a relevant topic, but in our work, we have, let's say, a bottom to top approach. So we detect many different false news, we verify them, and then we aggregate them in different topics, different narratives. I will go back to narratives after a few minutes. So especially in the context of EDMO, we have this very important and powerful tool, which is our fact-checking network, a network of now 44 fact-checking organizations spread all across the European Union, covering all the member states. We ask these organizations every month to send us information about the disinformation that they detect through a questionnaire. So we ask, for example, quantitative questions like how many articles have you published last month? How many of those were about climate change is one of the topics we monitor consistently together with the war in Ukraine and the pandemic. So through this monitoring, through the results that we gather from these organizations, we are able to, for example, thanks to the quantitative data, to draft some charts. You can see here, the white line is the share of COVID-19 related disinformation on the total detected disinformation. So very strong until basically February, March 2022, when the war in Ukraine started. Then the yellow line is the war in Ukraine related disinformation, very, very strong at the beginning. Then basically going very rapidly down, and now having, let's say, up and down evolution. And then the blue line, the last one, is the one about climate change. As you can see, we started monitoring this during the summer of 2022, because in the previous months, before we asked explicit questions about how many articles have you published about climate change related disinformation, we detected through the answers that we received to our questionnaires already an increasing volume of the disinformation related to climate change. So we have the starting point quite high in August 2022 because of the heat waves and the related disinformation. And then now, let's say it's a minor but constant topic of disinformation in our monitoring. And I think it's important, as you see, that happened in the summer, this peak of this highest point in the line, at least, because in general we understood that disinformation follows information. Where information goes, the disinformation will follow. So if the newspaper, the news program, TV shows are talking about heat waves, for example, and this happened a lot during the summer, then we have a lot of disinformation talking about heat waves. We expected something similar happening during the winter, but considering that the winter was not so exceptional, the information was not so much talking about it in terms of climate change, and then disinformation as well. So also we ask qualitative information through the questionnaires to the organizations of the network. And analyzing the disinformation stories, the content that they share with us, we are able to isolate some narratives. What's our definition of a disinformation narrative? Again, we start from the bottom. So the single false news, the single altered image, the single invented news, the single altered picture, and so on. If we see a lot of single false news, specific false news, provably false, I mean, this is not an opinion, this is something that we can actually demonstrate it's false, conveying a specific message, we identify that message with a disinformation narrative. So, for example, to give you a different topic, like the war in Ukraine, if we see a lot of images of Zelensky with the swastika photoshopped on his shirt, this is false news conveying the narrative that Zelensky is a pro-Nazi president. About climate change, during the summer of 2022, we isolated 4 different disinformation narratives, and then we added a 5th one in the following month. So the first one is usually, you know, the most well spread, and also the most obvious one. Climate change is not real. So basically 100% climate change denialism. It doesn't exist. It's a conspiracy. It's all false. Then we have a different variation that climate change maybe is real, but it's not related to human activities. And so we have false news saying, for example, but I will dig in examples more later, but just to give you a quick example here, that climate change depends on the soul, the activity of the sun, basically. Then we have a second narrative, that it's traditional media spreading panic through false news and manipulated images. So basically eroding our trust in traditional and reliable information, reliable media. And I will give you the examples also about this. Then we have a direct attack to climate movements, the climate activists, with false news that depict them as hypocritical and or very, very stupid, foolish, and so on. The 4th one we identified in July 2022 was about renewables, recycling, and most of all, electric vehicles being useless or even dangerous. So false videos of electric cars exploding, saying, hey, you see how dangerous is an electric car, and so on. Then the 5th one that we detected the following month was about fossil fuels not having a strong negative impact on climate change. We've detected, for example, false news saying, hey, scientific studies said that actually CO2 is very good for the environment. We have more green on the map thanks to CO2, carbon dioxide. Now, let's see some examples of these narratives I just talked about. So climate change is not real and or is not related to human activities. So there is no link between CO2 emissions in the atmosphere and global warming. Or, for example, the false news that the NASA announced that climate change was caused by the changes in the Earth's orbit. So an astronomical reason for climate change. Or again, Earth's warming is due to natural solar cycles, the ones I already mentioned. It's due to the sun, and humans have little influence on the Earth's climate. To support this narrative, also, we see usually two techniques, among others, that are worth highlighting. One is the misuse of experts. So if you find an expert, maybe a Nobel Prize in physics, that is a skeptic or denialist about climate change, it's basically you found your gold mine, because people will tend to believe in the principle of authority. So if a Nobel Prize, if a very important scientist said something, it must be true. This is not accurate, because we know that in science, the important thing is the scientific consensus. If 99.9% of the scientific community that deals with climatology agree that the climate change is real and is related to human activities, the 0.01% opinion of a single expert, it's not very relevant. And of course, it cannot be used to disprove the findings of the scientific community as a whole. And then the other technique that we saw and we detected quite often is the misuse of meteorology news. So, for example, now it's raining a lot in Italy, and we are already reading people saying, it's cold and rainy. Where it is now, this famous climate change, the global warming, it's not warming at all. It's freezing hell now in Milan. And so they use this kind of meteorology news to disprove the scientific basis of climate change. But this is, of course, nonsense. Climatology and meteorology are two different branches of science. Then the second example about traditional media, the second narrative, sorry, about traditional media spreading panic through false news. This was very, very big during last summer. And it was conveyed especially through these kind of images I put here in the example. So just opposing different maps, meteorological maps with the temperature, saying, hey guys, look at here. In 2019, Germany, you can see, or Sweden, or you see other countries in the other part of the slide, it's red because they want us to panic. This is the color of alarm, alert, red alert. Stay absolutely alerted about this. This is very dangerous. This is bad. And 10 years ago, with basically the same temperatures, look at the maps. They are all green and sunny and nobody was worried. So this is clearly media creating panic. It's not something true. The temperatures are the same, but this is all false. They took different maps, even from different televisions, that during time they used absolutely the same colors. They just used different maps from different TV shows, from different news outlets, and they just opposed them to say they changed the color, but they never changed the color. It's just a different kind of map. The red kind of map was used also back in 2009. So it's absolutely the same. Nothing changed. Then third narrative about attacking renewables, recycling, and electric vehicles. See some example here as well. So, for example, that electric cars are more easily flammable than traditional ones. This is counterintuitive if you think about that fossil fuels are actually inside, they are explosive, they are actually inside a car, and a battery shouldn't be as much dangerous as. And indeed, usually these are false images and false videos of other kind of explosions that are used in this kind of disinformation narratives. Or again, to produce a battery for an electric vehicle, it's you produce more CO2 because you need to collect the raw materials, and in order to collect these materials, you produce more CO2 than the one you actually save in comparison with a fossil fuel engine. Or again, each wind turbine releases 62 kilograms per year of microplastic in the environment. So you think wind turbines are good? No, they are not. And this figure was absolutely wrong. It was like 1,000 times wrong. They misunderstood a scientific study. Or again, false images about electric cars being charged with diesel generators. And this is frustrating because you think, come on, we are using electric cars and we need to charge them with diesel generators. Again, it was false. It was a doctored image. Or about, for example, recycling, the false news that garbage trucks that collect waste actually end up dumping the content of all the different recycling bins in the same container. So mixing all together, and basically you spend a lot of time in your house differentiating that kind of product. It's also absolutely useless, because in the end the trucks will undo what you did. And this is just a few examples, but this narrative is quite strong as well. Then the last one of the fourth we identified first in July, about climate movement being hypocritical and foolish. Of course, Greta Thunberg is the biggest target here. So, but more, let's start for the first one that was more very popular in recent months. So activists destroying famous paintings. We know that activists threw paint to the actually protective glass in front of paintings. And you can absolutely condemn this action. You can absolutely disagree with this action. You can think this is stupid. But actually, if you spread the news that they destroyed or damaged a Van Gogh painting, you're actually spreading disinformation, because it's not true. That didn't happen. Usually, the painting they use is easily washable. Now in Milan, we have a case that the paint was not so washable as they thought, so that is an issue. But in general, we saw a whole campaign of the legitimization of these people, of these activists, because of the alleged damage that actually never happened to paintings and other arts pieces. Then again, Greta Thunberg, as I was saying, it's a clear target. And for example, they attack her because they say, you want to use batteries, but to build batteries, you'd need to exploit child work. So basically, you're advocating for child work exploitation. This is very stupid, of course, but again, a lot of people actually believe this kind of narratives. Or the third example, it's about picture of parks and squares where climate movement and activists held their demonstration. And you see the whole place trashed with a lot of trashes all over the place. So basically saying, you are hypocrites, because you say you want to defend the earth, but in the end, you are just polluting it. Or the last one is about a medical flight with a patient on board that had to change route due to a climate protest in Schiphol in the Netherlands. You can understand how much enraging can be this kind of news. And it was, again, demonstrably false. This never happened. Now, to end, and this is my last slide. This is a recent disinformation. I won't call it narrative, but let's say a disinformation content, very, very viral, that we are detecting in the European Union. And it's about the climate lockdown conspiracy theory. I don't know if you're familiar with this thing. It's very, very weird, for me at least. So basically, a lot of content, demonstrably false content, started circulating already in December, saying, hey guys, now the European Commission or the national member states or a different authority, the World Economic Forum, and usually, the usual bad guys in the conspiracy theories, they want to close us in our home again, where they want to put us in lockdown, because they want to fight climate change. They want to reduce the pollution. Where does this conspiracy theory come from? It's a misunderstanding of the urban concept of 15-minute cities, which is this idea that you should have all the services that you need in the 15 minutes area by bike or by walk nearby your house. So you need to have schools, hospitals, groceries, and so on. People started spreading false news that you will be locked in this 15 minutes area in your city. So if you step out of your area, you will be fined, you will be sanctioned. And this is absolutely false. Sometimes this false news, this started from Oxford in particular, because together with the 15-minute cities plan of the Oxford Council, there was also this traffic filter plan, which was a different thing. So basically preventing some cars to go in some roads to fight traffic, or to fight, of course, also pollution, but also, to avoiding jams inside in the city traffic. And they put these things together and they create this conspiracy about the Oxford Council wanting basically to close people again in lockdown to fight the climate change. This content, we first detected it in Germany, but then immediately spilled in many EU countries. Now it's very popular. I think we have it basically in all the EU countries or so. But we detected already the following month in Austria, France, Spain, Poland, Romania, Ireland, Croatia, and so on. And it's still ongoing. I mean, already I just saw the answers to our questionnaires for the brief on the disinformation that circulated in April. And even in April, this false news, this false content is still circulating. So we asked, why is it so popular? We will publish an investigation dedicated to this specific issue as EDMO in the next weeks. But we asked ourselves, why is it so popular? And one of the answers that we got from colleagues and experts is that most likely it's the very smart use from the disinformers of this concept of lockdowns, which was the boogeyman of the COVID-19 pandemic. So everybody has very strong emotional reaction to the concept of lockdown, and using the concept of lockdown that creates negative emotion and uniting it with the fight against climate change is a very good technique to have people actually hating the measures that you want to apply, to implement, to fight the climate change. So you are basically trying to capture people who was already exhausted, maybe also skeptical about the pandemic of COVID-19 contrast measures. So maybe you, even if you're not an anti-vaxxer, but you are skeptical about the management of the whole pandemic, this kind of false news, it's very attracting for you. Also, the other reason why is quite likely so popular is that this conspiracy theory, of course, fits with all the existing conspiracy theories. So it is the elite against the people, is the elite using a non-existing emergency. Now it's climate change, before it was the pandemic, in the future will be that the world population is too high. So these are all imaginary problems for the conspiracy theorists. The elite use these imaginary problems to actually destroy the freedoms of the people, to destroy the life of the people. So there is this contrast. And of course, this conspiracy theory fits perfectly in it. Also, it's interesting because, as I said at the beginning of this explanation, this story puts together the lockdowns coming from the COVID-19, let's say, field of disinformation. It puts it together with the climate change denialism. And these kind of overlaps are very common, and we are seeing a lot of them about different huge topics of disinformation. Another one, for example, is between the pandemic and the pro-Russia, anti-Ukraine disinformation field. So recently we detected the false news that Putin commanded to destroy all the COVID-19 vaccines inside Russia. This kind of news, of course, is winking to anti-vaxxers. And we see overlaps also between climate change and pro-Russia disinformation. So it's a very complex and chaotic scenario. I hope I was able to give you at least a general idea of the disinformation that is circulating. Thank you for bearing with me.
Thank you, Tommaso. Thank you for your presentation. I would leave the floor directly to Paula, and we keep collecting Q&A for the end of your talks.
Thank you very much. It's a hard job, the one that I have now, because we are moving from the narratives, which usually is something which is easy to follow, to trying to find solution, which is not so easy to follow. So I will, when I was preparing this presentation, I was thinking I will mix a little the policy solution, but also with some additional, if you want, context related to disinformation, in particular to climate change. So let me start by definition. Disinformation, the way it is intended in the EU, is all form of false, inaccurate, or misleading information designed, presented, and promoted. This is important to intentionally create public harm or for profit. I'm putting the accent on intentionally because this is precisely where disinformation differs from what we call misinformation, which means you are kind of sharing and promoting something without knowing that actually you are causing harm. There's a very nice quote from a report that I mentioned in the end of this presentation, which is key to understand how disinformation works, which is disinformation goes nowhere without amplification. If I produce disinformation content and I'm not in a position to amplify it, of course, it goes nowhere and it has no impact and it doesn't create any harm. Of course, things change when actually there is amplification. I think echo chambers are something that many years ago was something more like, if you want, for the experts in the electronic communication and communication regulation field. Now everybody is quite aware about what echo chambers are. We sometimes tend to think that echo chambers are something kind of far from us, in the sense that we see them as like small chambers, but actually, if you think about it, we are all in our echo chambers. Also, because this is pretty much in line with our brain. I mean, we tend to be lazy. We tend to be willing to have information that confirms our beliefs rather than opposite ones. And this also has an impact on our perception, in the sense that what is in our echo chamber is repeatedly confirmed. So we have the idea, the perception that this is actually the dominant view, while very often it is, of course, not. And to put the whole disinformation story also in context, I also have to mention populism and the waves, the populist waves of the recent years. Also because, as it's often put, like, populism is about elite versus people. And unfortunately, when it's about climate change, the elite is seen as, of course, the scientific community, and people is people, of course. And I'm saying that because, and I will get to that later, apparently the neuroscientists, they tell us that it is very difficult for us in general to cope with something that is bigger than us, that is complicated, that requires lots of indeed studies. So it's very easy, if you want, for populism to enter this debate, precisely because of that. And then let me also mention another thing that helps in understanding why actually disinformation is spreading, can spread easily, which is that the populist discourse, it is said, is simple, direct, and emotionally connoted. And this is really how disinformation works. It is simple. Usually the messages are quite simple, and it's done very often with simple techniques. It is direct. These informers have actually usually they have more knowledge on how actually content can impact our brain than those who actually inform. And it is emotionally noted, and this is very important. There is research telling us, for example, that emotion play a key role when we share online. And if we fear something, or if we are angry, we share irrationally. If we are in a calm and positive situation, we share actually more rationally online. Of course, let me say that this information is not something that is circulating online only. Unfortunately, it's also circulating on traditional media. All that, of course, impacts the trust that we have in institutions and in science. And we saw that, of course, also with the COVID pandemic. And I'm pretty sure there will be studies, and there are studies already ongoing, on understanding if actually the impression and the emotions that people link to science in relation to to COVID actually can have an impact on the reliance on science on climate change. Because in both, you see, there is a matter of course, trusting scientific evidence. But with COVID, it was clear that to anyone what a scientific process is, which is kind of course, like collecting data, testing, and so on. So, of course, at the very beginning of COVID, science wouldn't have all the answers that the society was expecting. And this is precisely because it is science. No? So it could have an impact also on how much people trust science in relation to climate change. And let me also highlight one important element of disinformation, which is monetization. I don't know how familiar you are with how disinformation works, but you can monetize, so make money out of disinformation, in general, out of content that becomes viral, because you can place ads on it, for example. So it's not to be discarded, this element, because, and this we see it not only with climate change, but also on other occasions, there are, if you want, free surfers, if you want. So basically spreaders of disinformation who don't really care about the message they are spreading and the impact it has, they actually care about monetizing over it. So this can be, of course, also a danger, because it brings a disinformation narrative even out of the borders in which it may stay. And so is climate change disinformation delaying the efforts in addressing climate change? Apparently, yes. There is evidence was collected on that. And the last IPCC report, I mentioned here the page, at which page is also addressing the issue of the impact of disinformation on action. And here, why am I asking myself if it's a if we have to talk about climate change or climate emergency or climate crisis? We will get back to that when I'm in a few minutes go to the policy response. So when it's about online platforms, they have some policies on disinformation on climate change. I'm showing you here examples of Meta, TikTok, and Google. You see, for example, Meta, when fact checkers rate content as false, we add a warning label and reduce the visibility of the content. We don't recommend content or approve ads that have been rated false by one of our fact-checking partners, and we take actions against pages and groups and so on that repeatedly share false claims about climate science. TikTok says it is disinformation on climate change is not allowed. Indeed, climate change misinformation that undermines well-established scientific consensus, such as denying the existence of climate change or the factors that contribute to it. Google, the monetization policy that prohibits ads and monetization of content that contradicts well-established scientific consensus. So you see there are policies. However, and I will try to explain that in an easy way, things are not so easy as they may think. Why? Because there is a fundamental principle in the EU, which is freedom of expression. And this means that the whole policy to tackle disinformation needs to take that into account. Of course, if we are talking about illegal content, if you want, it's easier. Because, I mean, if it's, for example, hate speech, child pornography, violation of copyright, it's easy. Why? Because it's illegal. So said very, very easily, but that is content that can be removed. But when it's not illegal, then of course it's the response needs to be different. And this is why in the EU we started with a self-regulatory approach. So basically the online platforms and the signatories of a given code of practice on disinformation who take the lead on together agreeing on particular number of commitments and measures to tackle disinformation. There was a first code in 2018, which had less signatories and had a number of, if you want, downsides. And now last year, the new code was the strengthened code was adopted and signed actually by a quite large constituency of stakeholders, not only the online platforms, but also fact checkers, civil society organization, advertising sector. The ad sector was also in the previous one, but in a more short representation. The trend in the EU is now to move from that self-regulatory tool to the co-regulation under the Digital Services Act. I know it's very technical and very legal oriented, but let me just say that if you want, the basis of the Digital Services Act is not to act on the content, because as I was saying, I mean, in relation to disinformation, it's not too much the focus on the content, rather on the services. Put it in a very easy way, one of the main important elements of the DSA, so the Digital Services Act, is that the platforms, which means the very large online platforms, so Twitter, Meta, and so on, they have to run risk assessments to understand if their services can be, if you want, exploited to, among others, share disinformation. So you see, it is on understanding if the service can be exploited to do something. Now, there are, both in the Code of Practice that I was mentioning and in the Digital Services Act, there are commitments related to crisis. And this is why I have kind of a provocative title, shall we call it climate crisis? Because in that specific case, actually, under the code, the signatories and under the DSA, of course, the players to which the DSA applies, they have to implement specific measures. It's not, I mean, it's not that they start deleting content, but as you can see here, there are specific, for example, cooperation coordination measures. There are specific monitoring requests, and there are, if you want, there is a specific attention. So under the DSA, a crisis shall be deemed to have occurred when extraordinary circumstances lead to a serious threat to public security or public health. Of course, I think we agree that climate change can have an impact on public security, but also on public health, but also on public security. Now, of course, this is now a little provocative because, I mean, a crisis is then also to finish, and this article also foresees a 3 months plus 3 months period of appliance of the article itself. But I mean, I think it will be very interesting to see, like, if there is, for example, a natural disaster that is clearly linked to climate change, how we will cope legally with that. I will not go too much into detail now because I understand it is not easy for those who are not familiar with this, but I just wanted to give you kind of a very broad picture. So to conclude, a few things. So when you deal with disinformation, as I think it is clearly, it came out from my presentation, it's not a one silver bullet point. So basically, you need different stakeholders, you need different areas of intervention that coordinated and all together will help in tackling disinformation. Tommaso is a fact checker. Fact checking plays a key role. Media and information literacy, again, societal resilience, another one. Research is fundamental, and precisely because through research we can understand the whole phenomenon of disinformation and then go with more evidence-based policies. Also, what is really key, and this is something that for which actually I'm also thankful of this dialogue, is understand how disinformation spreads, in the sense how it works. In the end of my presentation, I've put a reading that I suggest to everyone, because it's technical on the focus, but actually the way it is written is very clear, and it shows you, for example, which are the actors, the messages, the techniques behind disinformation. This also means that effective communication is also key. There's often among the stakeholders on disinformation this debate on, like, why is it that disinformation clearly is, if you want, effective, while communication from institutional players or media is less? For example, why are we continuing using so much text? And why don't we use more images, which visuals we know have a clear, fast impact on our brains? So multi-stakeholder, but also multidisciplinary. I think you heard from my presentation, I ranged from more legal aspects to the neuroscience, to the sociological aspect, for example, related to populism. And my suggestion is actually to keep that in mind, and also to have some sort of climate change desk. So we need the different actors all together at the same desk. So we need the climate, it's already happening. And I saw also that you hosted a dialogue on how the IPCC is also moving into that direction, but it is really key. Let's put really all the various stakeholders, not only related to the climate, so to kind of analyzing climate change, but also on, like, the impact of, for example, in this case, disinformation, how to tackle it, and so on. And then it's I'm not an expert, I have to admit that, on the reporting that the private sector has to do, the big companies are doing on basically their emissions. But what I know is that there is one reporting, which is a scope 3 indirect greenhouse gas emissions reporting. So basically it's like the indirect emissions that their services or the production of their services or products causes. And so my question is, can we include this information there? So basically, if when Meta, when Twitter, they do their reporting on their scope 3 reporting, why wouldn't they? Well, could they include also the impact that their services have on spreading this information on climate change, and thus, by consequence, the impact that this has on climate change? Here are the two just very quick suggestions. I can also type them in the chat. It's one more specific on climate changes information, and the second one, which I was mentioning, if you have an interest in understanding a little better how this information works, I really recommend this reading. Thank you very much, and I really look forward to getting your questions.
Thank you, Paola, and thank you, Tommaso, for your very useful presentation to know this new topic in for our dialogues. We have received a lot of questions and comments. I would go straight to the questions, since we can share with you the list of all comments also later on after the webinar. A couple of questions are about, one from Laura Zamboni and one from Domenico Canzonero, about corporate greenwashing. Domenico asks, in your work, do you also consider corporate greenwashing among the sources of climate change misinformation? Most green marketing fits the narrative that one can save the planet with one's purchases, or that there are universal solutions that always apply to everyone. Isn't this one of the biggest misinformations? So, not sure who of you would like to reply this question.
I can reply about the greenwashing.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, if we detect a story or a content that contains greenwashing as a misinformation technique, we will definitely point it out. I mean, we are not, let's say, only looking at the immediate evidence, but if it's a misleading content, so it leads you to believe something that is not true, we will definitely point that out.
Okay. There are some comments and reflections about which tools EDMO uses to assess if a narrative is true or false, and how you or other authorities what you do when this misinformation is detected. Yeah, Paula also addressed the point of the regulation. If you want to add something about that, that would be great.
Okay, I can start, then I leave you the floor, Paula. So we as EDMO, we do not, let's say, decide if something is true or not. As I said, we have a network of 44 fact-checking organizations. My organizations, the ones I am a deputy director of, Pagella, Politica, and Facta News, they are members of this network, but we have colleagues in Spain, France, Germany, Sweden, Portugal, you name it, we have them. So we basically gather information from these organizations, and we trust these organizations because they are part of IFCN, which is the International Fact-Checking Network of Fact-Checkers. And basically, you need to fulfill a lot of very strict criteria and undergo a very strict assessment procedure in order to become a member of IFCN. Or in EDMO, we have our own procedure, but let's say that the vast majority of organizations that are inside the EDMO fact-checking network are IFCN. The minority that are not IFCN were vetted by EDMO. So we trust these organizations because they have a transparent methodology, they do not have conflict of interest, they are politically independent, and so on. And we trust, most of all, the process. The process of fact-checking is something that should create trust in the readers as well, because when we write an article, a fact-checking article, we start, of course, with the false content, the misleading content, with its source. Then we use, if it's possible, and 90% of the time it's possible, we use public sources to demonstrate, public institutional sources to demonstrate that that content is false. So as a reader, you can basically click on the links that we put inside the article and replicate the logical procedure that we followed in order to debunk a content, to say that that content is true or false. So we have this very clear methodology for fact-checking a content. And as organizations, we have very, very high standards that we need to comply with in order to be real independent fact-checking organizations, because our issue is that there are a lot of actors that self-describe themselves as fact-checking organizations, and they're not. They are propaganda outlets. They are linked to governments, political think tanks that clearly push an economical interest. So it's very important, the independence and the accountability of the fact-checking organizations, and it's very important that the single fact-checking article follows a very clear methodological procedure.
Paula, would you like to add something, or I go ahead?
Yeah, no, I think on EDMO and fact checking, Tommaso said it all. I was about to say what Tommaso said, that we have criteria that the independent fact checkers have to, of course, fulfill, and they are assessed on that basis. So, yeah. As Tommaso was saying, EDMO is not doing fact-checking. EDMO is collecting fact-checking from these independent fact-checkers, and it's very interesting to see how often actually it's the same, as Tommaso was mentioning, it's the same narrative detected in different countries.
Okay, thank you. Arianna Acerno, our colleague at CMCC, asks, in your opinion, if it is worth to engage the deniers and target them with correct information, or we should consider them as a lost audience?
Well, on this, I will start and then Tommaso will follow, I guess. So I think I think it relates to what I was saying at the beginning, how big these echo chambers are, because if they're quite big, to just say, okay, we don't address them, it can be quite risky, no? There are theories in which, of course, if it's a very small community, and if this information stays there, you can kind of keep it small and but don't act too much. My idea is actually that, so there is one side which is fact checking, which in my opinion in any case needs to happen, also because there needs to be a record about the fact that something was said and it was verified. So also for the future, we need that. So this is something that in any case has to stay. Then how to deal with, like, can we ever convince these persons and so on? I think that the answer is broader, and it goes to this specific historical moment in which we are seeing extremism, in which we are seeing kind of mistrust in institution, in the media, and so on. So unfortunately, probably the answer or the solution relies on something which is way broader than only disinformation or disinformation on climate change. What I think is important, and I saw also a question in those lines, is that the scientific community kind of how can I say, gets equipped with communication tools and with a way to communicate things in a way that actually is accessible to the community. As I was saying before, I mean, even for us, I mean, understanding, if I read a paper by a scientific paper on climate change, I may not understand everything, although I am a person that has a given background and so on. So it's very important to convey a message in a way that it can be digested easily. And this is what disinformation does very well. I mean, the disinformers, they're very good in giving you, in using techniques that stay in our brain.
Thank you. We are receiving really a lot of questions. There is one which is attracting me. It's about artificial intelligence. Is there a case to use artificial intelligence to automatically comment on climate change disinformation?
Yeah, I guess the question, Tommaso, you want to start and I will take it then.
Okay, yeah, definitely artificial intelligence. It's both a huge opportunity and a huge problem. I first wanted to comment about, sorry, the previous question very, very quickly. Sorry. We are not talking about people who believes that the earth is flat. So a very small community of crazy people. We have a lot of politicians, very important journalists, very important public figures spreading this information about climate change. So yes, I think it's very important to debunk it constantly, even if you want to change the mind of the people saying the disinformation news or whatever, spreading disinformation about climate change, then you have to fight the spread in society of the opinions, of the ideas of these people supporting denialism. To go back to artificial intelligence, as I was saying, yeah, it's both a huge opportunity because it can help us making more quick some parts of our jobs, but I don't think it can never fully replace humans in fact-checking, mostly because the worst case, the most dangerous case of disinformation are the more complex one, the ones that exploit nuances, maybe, you know, something that is half true, half false, and then you need humans to do the whole process and the explanation. Artificial intelligence on that in that sense is not completely helpful. It's partially helpful. On the other hand, it's very dangerous because with artificial intelligence you can create texts, images, videos that are not true, and the artificial intelligence is getting better and better in creating something that it's very hard to distinct from what is true. So right now, for example, AI generated images, they're still detectable as false. I'm thinking about the Pope with that white fluffy jacket, or Trump getting arrested, or Julian Assange in jail, or Putin on its knees kissing the hand of the Chinese president Xi Jinping. These are quite clear cases of AI generated images that are clearly false. But in 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, maybe it will be absolutely impossible to distinct false AI generated images from true images. And if we have a flood of false images, false videos accompanied by false texts about a specific topic, conveying some specific narratives, how can the users of social media and in general the users can defend themselves? So we are very concerned about the developments of AI because, yeah, the opportunities are great, but we fear that the risks are even greater.
Thank you, Tommaso. There is also another question about if you have done any comparison between the narratives of false news in Europe compared to other regions, such as the US.
Sadly, no, because we don't have right now a framework for cooperation between different networks of fact-checking organizations, but it's something that we're actually working on, mostly about Global South. So we are in contact with the networks of fact-checking organizations in Africa, Middle East, and South America. And of course, we have also relation with our colleagues from North America, United States, but this is something that still have to happen.
Thank you. I see that we have almost 200 people connected, and we are a community of people that is expert in climate change or interested in, at least in going more in depth, or we have climate change communicators. This is a community that is already working on this topic and is doing its best to spread good information, I think. And this is, I think, why we are receiving a lot of comments and questions about what should we do? I mean, I find people who ask, what could we, for example, on social media, how could, when we identify false information, misinformation, how could we act? There is another comment, Andrea Cavina, who says, what are the best strategies and approaches to fight both dis and misinformation without censoring them? So in my opinion, censorship is potentially dangerous. A climatologist, Paolo Frontero, who says that he finds himself very dissonant with people who not believe in international consensus. What arguments can be proposed to these people? So there is more than one person who is asking themselves how to act against disinformation. Something has already been said, but if we can focus a bit on this.
So one thing, as I was saying, we cannot just delete this content, but what you can do is, of course, let's start with the online platform. Every platform has its, as I was mentioning, policy, and you can signal content to the platforms that would then, if they have an agreement with fact checkers, they would then get in touch with the fact checkers to verify it. So you can signal if there's any violation of the terms and conditions of a platform, you can inform, of course, the online platforms. Then another solution, of course, and I saw that there were lots of comments on that, like, would we be ever able to counter this emotional, if you want, a communication from the other side? Yes. And I was, for example, thinking of David Attenborough, that like last year did this amazing speech, which was all positive. It was like, we can do it. We are the best animals on planet in the end. We can do amazing things. So rather than being kind of stop attacking us, we are right, and so on, be motivational, motivate, because that really clearly helps. I mean, I think not by chance he did that speech. I mean, in such a community, actually, because it was, if I'm not mistaken, in I don't remember if at the IPCC report presentation, or in any case with scientists in the room. So clearly the message was, let's try to communicate in a different way. Then I wanted to share, there is this, I saw this interesting research. There was a literature review saying years ago that 97% of scientists agree on the human effects on climate change. And then another one saying 99%, and then another article saying who cares? And the reply was clearly, actually, we do care, because in that 3%, is where actually the disinformation on climate change can spread, saying, you see, the scientists are not agreeing and so on. So indeed, I think climate change has this advantage that the scientific community is basically almost 100% agreeing on that. So bring that as your argument, but then also, again, use visuals, use the help of communicator to communicate not in a scientific way, and not even in a way that's trying to convince, just a way that shows facts. And this is how people actually would then follow. I think that also the IPCC now, they are working with how is it called? With an institute that deals with infographics and so on, precisely to kind of use the how can I say, the communication tools that go on the emotions indeed.
Yeah, I agree with Paula said. I mean, do not feed the trolls. If one is a troll, just don't lose your time and temper with him or her, and keep it positive. Even if the topic is very, depressing and hard, and our hearts are heavy, keep it light, and try to avoid to divide people in tribes, because the tribe mentality basically destroys the chances of communication and of maybe changing the idea of the other one.
Time is running out. I would just ask the last one, which is again a question asked 2 times by 2 different people. It's about emotions. How to debunk false information which lays widely on emotions with a message of correct information which lays upon very rational arguments.
I think it's what I was saying right now. I mean, the arguments are rational because they're based on facts, but you can still communicate them emotionally. So it's not that emotions are just attached to negative things or to lies or to things that are not based on facts. On the contrary, you can really, with rational elements and figures, play a lot on them with emotions. So that's precisely what I was saying before.
Yeah, I mean, usually, stories are better than facts because stories are more interesting, more emotional. Facts are boring. But you can have stories supporting the facts and fight against stories that are not supported by facts. So, yeah.
Yes, and this is our work as communicators on climate
Exactly.
change, what we are trying to do, also involving different disciplines, from artists to writers, to talk about how to create a positive narrative and also reliable and based on science, but which can involve also emotions. I would stop here, but we will share the additional comments and questions that have arrived on the chat with the speakers. I thank you both for your presentation and for your availability to discuss with our audience about this great topic. And thank you for the attention to all participants who stayed until the end connected. And see you next week at the next dialogue, on this time on art, actually, on art, and we will of course talk about emotions as well. Thanks you so much, Paula.
Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Bye. Have a good day. Bye-bye.